The dawn broke over the Gila River like a wound reopening. Ayesha stood at the water's edge, her hands working red mud through the long black strands of her hair, staining them the color of dried blood. This was the Apache way of mourning, a ritual she had performed in secret for 2 years now, always before sunrise, always alone. The mud clung to her scalp, heavy and cold, a physical reminder of the weight she carried every waking moment. Her reflection in the slow-moving water showed a woman who existed between two worlds and belonged to neither. To the people of Silver Creek, 30 miles from the San Carlos Reservation, she was Maria Gonzalez, a quiet Mexican seamstress who kept to herself and asked for nothing. To her own people, the Chiricahua Apache locked behind the wire fences of the reservation, she was Ayesha, the ghost wife, the woman who had chosen survival over memory, shame over death. But in this moment, with the sun not yet clearing the eastern mountains and the mud drying tight against her skin, she was simply a mother who had not held her son in 63 days. The year was 1886, and Arizona Territory was a place where the United States government had decided that being Apache was a crime punishable by erasure. 1 year had passed since Geronimo's surrender, and with that surrender had come a darkness deeper than any the desert had ever known. The reservations were no longer just places of containment. They had become laboratories of cultural destruction, where children were taken from their mothers and sent to boarding schools hundreds of miles away, where speaking the Apache language earned beatings, where names were stripped away and replaced with English syllables that meant nothing, signified nothing, carried no history or honor or connection to the earth. Ayesha's son had been taken 26 months ago. Naalnish, which meant he who works, was now called Nathan by the teachers at the Phoenix Indian Industrial School. He was 6 years old. She wondered if he still remembered the word for mother in Apache. She wondered if he remembered her face. The mud ritual complete, Ayesha walked back toward the small adobe house she rented at the edge of Silver Creek. It was barely more than a single room with a cooking area and a sleeping pallet, but it was hers, purchased with the wages she earned taking in laundry and doing alterations for the town's more respectable women. Women who would never invite her into their homes. Women who paid her in coins left on doorsteps, who averted their eyes when they passed her on the street, who whispered when they thought she could not hear. She did not mind their avoidance. It kept her safe. It kept her secret. Inside the house, Ayesha removed the mud-stiffened hair wrap and began the process of washing it clean, heating water over the small stove, working her fingers through the tangles. By the time the sun had fully risen, her hair hung damp and black down her back, and Maria Gonzalez had returned. She pinned it into a severe bun, wrapped a faded shawl around her shoulders, and picked up the basket of mending she needed to deliver to Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife. The walk into town took 20 minutes. Silver Creek was not large, perhaps 300 souls, most of them farmers or ranchers, or men who worked the failing silver mines that had given the town its name. There was a general store, a saloon, a small church with a dedicated young reverend, and a collection of businesses that served the needs of people trying to make lives in a hard land. Ayesha kept her eyes down as she walked, a habit born of necessity. Eye contact invited conversation. Conversation invited questions. Questions invited scrutiny. And scrutiny was the one thing she could not afford. She was halfway to the Patterson house when she heard the commotion. A crowd had gathered outside the general store, and even from a distance, Ayesha could feel the anger in the air, thick and electric, like the moments before a monsoon storm. She should have turned away, should have taken the long route around the square. But something made her pause, made her drift closer to the edge of the gathering, made her listen. A man's voice rose above the murmur of the crowd, speaking with an authority that demanded attention. "I said he has a pass. The law states that any Apache holding a valid pass issued by the Indian Agency may conduct business in town. Are you refusing to follow the law? Mr. Morrison?" Ayesha's breath caught. An Apache in town. Someone from San Carlos, someone who might have news of her mother, of her son. She moved closer, using the crowd as cover, craning to see. The storekeeper, Morrison, was red-faced and belligerent. "I don't care what paper he's waving around. I don't serve Indians. Not in my store. Not ever. They can take their business back to the reservation. The reservation is 40 miles from here, and the government store there charges twice your prices for goods half the quality. The defending voice belonged to a man Ayesha could not yet see, someone standing between Morrison and his intended victim. You'll accept his money, and you'll treat him with the basic dignity the law requires. Morrison spat on the ground. And who are you to tell me how to run my business? Some Indian lover who doesn't know the history here? My brother was killed by Apaches in '83. My brother, who never hurt nobody, cut down while he was checking his fence line. I'm sorry for your loss. The voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. But punishing every Apache for the actions of warriors in a time of war is not justice. It's simply more violence. Ayesha finally glimpsed the speaker as the crowd shifted. He was tall, perhaps 35 years old, with dark hair that touched his collar and skin weathered by sun and wind. He wore practical clothing, working clothes, but something in the way he carried himself spoke of authority. And when he turned slightly, she saw the badge pinned to his vest. Indian agent, one of the government men charged with overseeing the reservations. Her stomach clenched. Indian agents were rarely friends to the Apache. Most were corrupt, skimming rations, selling supplies meant for the reservation on the black market, turning a blind eye to abuses. But this man was defending an Apache's right to shop in town. It made no sense. The Apache man at the center of the confrontation was old, perhaps 70, with a face carved by decades of sun and struggle. He stood silent and dignified, holding his pass in one gnarled hand, waiting to see how this white man's argument would resolve itself. Ayesha recognized him. His name was Key. He had been a friend of her father's before the wars, before the dying. Morrison was unmoved. Law or no law, I'm not selling to him. And if you've got a problem with that Agent Thornwood, you can take it up with the territorial marshal. The Indian Agent Thornwood studied Morrison for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. Very well. I'll note your refusal in my report. But I should mention that the government has been considering establishing an agency-run store here in Silver Creek to serve the Apache population. Given your unwillingness to accommodate legal customers, I expect that decision will be made quite soon. Competition might be good for business, or it might run you out of it. Morrison's face went from red to purple. You threatening me? No, sir, just explaining consequences. Thornwood turned to Key and spoke in a language that made Ayesha's heart stop. Apache. The man spoke Apache, and not the halting, butchered version of soldiers and missionaries, but fluid and correct with the proper tones. Shika, there is another store 2 streets north. The owner is a fair man. I will go with you. Key's weathered face betrayed no surprise, but Ayesha saw his eyes widen fractionally. He nodded and replied in Apache. You speak as one who learned from the people, not from books. I had good teachers. Thornwood offered his arm in a gesture that was both support and solidarity. Come, let these people have their anger. We have business to conduct. The crowd parted reluctantly as the 2 men walked through. Ayesha turned away before they could notice her, her mind spinning. An Indian agent who spoke Apache, who defended an old man's right to shop, who threatened a storekeeper on behalf of a people he was supposed to be controlling. What kind of man was this Ethan Thornwood? She filed the question away and continued to the Patterson house delivered. Her mending collected her payment and tried to focus on the ordinary tasks of her ordinary day. But the encounter at the store had unsettled something in her, had reminded her that she was not truly invisible, that the walls between her 2 lives were thinner than she wanted to believe. That evening, back in her small house, Ayesha pulled out the wooden box she kept hidden beneath the loose floorboard under her sleeping pallet. Inside were the things that connected her to her true self. A small bundle of sage, 3 blue beads from a necklace her mother had made her, a lock of Nalnish's baby hair, and letters smuggled out from the boarding school by a sympathetic teacher written in Nalnish's careful, childish hand. The most recent letter had arrived 3 weeks ago. Ayesha unfolded it now, though she had memorized every word. Dear Mama. It read in English because the children were forbidden to write in Apache. They cut my hair. I hate it. It makes me look like everyone else. Teacher says we must forget the old ways because they are evil. But Mama, I don't think you are evil. I don't think Grandma is evil. I don't understand. There is a room in the basement where they keep things from the Indian tribes. I saw a shirt there with blue beads like the ones you used to wear. It was behind glass. The sign said it belonged to a hostile Apache warrior who was killed. Mama, the shirt looks like the one in the picture you showed me of Papa. Is it his? Did they take it when he died, I want to ask, but I'm afraid. Please write soon. I'm forgetting how to say things in our language. I'm forgetting how to say mother. Now I only remember Mama. Love, Nathan. Ayasha folded the letter and pressed it to her chest, breathing slowly, fighting the wave of grief that threatened to pull her under. Taze's war shirt. The one she had sewn for him, decorated with blue beads, traded from a Navajo woman, each bead placed with prayers for his protection. The cavalry had taken it from his body after they killed him. She had assumed it was lost or destroyed. But no, they had kept it, displayed it, turned her husband's sacred clothing into a trophy, a teaching tool to show Apache children the fate of those who resisted. Rage and helplessness warred in her chest. She wanted to scream. She wanted to ride to Phoenix, break into that boarding school, and take back what was hers, take back her son, take back the pieces of her life that had been stolen. But she was one woman alone with no power and no resources. The weight of her powerlessness was crushing. She was still sitting there, letter in hand, when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Ayasha froze. No one came to her house. No one had reason to. She quickly returned the letter to the box, replaced the floorboard, and moved to the door, opening it just a crack. The rider was Ethan Thornwood. The Indian agent sat astride a sturdy chestnut gelding, his hat in his hand, his expression carefully neutral. When he saw her peer out, he made no move to dismount. He simply waited. Ayasha stepped outside, closing the door behind her, her mind racing. Had he discovered her identity? Was he here to arrest her, to drag her back to the reservation? Her hand drifted to the small knife she kept in her belt, hidden beneath her shawl. She would not go easily. "Miss Gonzalez." Thornwood's voice was quiet, respectful. "I apologize for calling unannounced. I wanted to speak with you if you have a moment." She said nothing, waiting. Let him make the first move. Let him show his hand. He seemed to understand her caution. "I saw you today at the store. You left quickly, but not before I noticed you listening to the conversation with Key." He paused. "You understood what we were saying? In Apache?" It was not a question. Ayasha felt ice spread through her veins, but she kept her face blank, her voice steady when she replied in Spanish-accented English. "I know a few words, from living near the reservation, but I am Mexican, señor, not Apache." Thornwood studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Of course. My apologies. I should not have presumed." But his eyes said he did not believe her, not for a second. "I actually came to ask if you might be willing to work for the Indian Agency. We need someone who can sew and mend. The blankets and clothing distributed to the Apache are often damaged in transport. It would be steady work, fair pay." Ayasha's mind whirred. This was a test. He suspected who she was, and he was offering her a way to either confirm or deny it. If she accepted, she would be working closely with the agency where her identity could be discovered. If she refused, it would seem suspicious. Why would a poor seamstress turn down steady work? "I will think about it," she said carefully, "and give you my answer tomorrow." "Fair enough." Thornwood settled his hat back on his head. "I'll be at the agency office in town. You can find me there." He started to turn his horse, then paused. "Miss Gonzalez, or whatever name you prefer, I want you to know something. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here to make things better if that's possible. I know that's hard to believe given the history, given what the government has done, but I'm asking you to consider the possibility that not all of us are the enemy." With that, he rode away into the gathering dusk, leaving Ayasha standing in her doorway, her heart pounding her carefully constructed walls, suddenly feeling dangerously fragile. She did not sleep that night. She sat on her pallet back against the wall, knife in hand, waiting for the cavalry to come crashing through her door. But they never came. And as the first light of dawn began to creep across the floor, she realized that Ethan Thornwood had not betrayed her. He had simply offered her a choice. And in doing so, he had given her something she had not expected. A sliver of hope. 3 days later, Ayasha walked into the Indian Agency office in Silver Creek. The building was small and plainly furnished with a desk, a filing cabinet, and maps of the reservation pinned to the walls. Thornwood looked up from paperwork when she entered, and something in his expression softened. "Miss Gonzalez, I'm glad you came. I will do the work," she said without preamble. "But I have conditions. I work from my home, not here. You deliver the items to me and collect them when finished, and you tell no one who is doing the work." Agreed. He stood and extended his hand. She hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm but not crushing, respectful of her autonomy. "There's one more thing. Twice a month I make supply runs to San Carlos. If you wanted to visit family, you could come along, as my assistant. The pass system doesn't apply to agency employees." Ayasha's breath caught. Access to the reservation. Legal access. The ability to see her mother, to gather information about Nyalnish. This was more than a job. This was a lifeline. "Why?" The word came out harsh. "Why would you do this for me?" Thornwood was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "Because 2 years ago I was part of a cavalry unit that hunted down a group of Apache trying to escape to Mexico. They weren't warriors. They were families. Women, children, old men. And among them was a young father who was only trying to protect his 6-year-old son from being taken to a boarding school." He met her eyes. "I tried to stop what happened. I tried to convince my commanding officer to accept their surrender peacefully. But I was overruled, and a good man died because I wasn't strong enough or brave enough to refuse an immoral order." Ayasha felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "What was his name? This man who died?" "Taze. His name was Taze." Thornwood's voice was barely above a whisper. "And before he died, he made me promise something. He said, 'Protect my wife. Protect my son.' So that's what I'm trying to do. 2 years too late. But I'm trying." The world narrowed to a pinpoint. The air in the room became too thick to breathe. Ayasha heard a sound like rushing water in her ears. This man, this Indian agent standing in front of her, had been there. Had been part of the unit that killed Taze. Had held her husband as he died. Her hand moved to her knife before she could think. She had it out and leveled at Thornwood's throat in the space of a heartbeat, her body shaking with rage and grief and a pain so intense it felt like dying. "You," she hissed in Apache, all pretense abandoned. "You were there. You killed him." Thornwood did not move, did not reach for a weapon. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, and met her gaze with eyes full of sorrow. "I shot him," he said in Apache, "but not to kill. I aimed for his shoulder, trying to wound him to stop the chase without ending his life. But Major Coulter was behind me, and Coulter shot to kill. The bullet that killed Taze came from Coulter's rifle, not mine. But I was still there. I was still part of it. And I will carry that shame until I die." Ayasha's hand trembled. The knife wavered. She wanted to drive it into his throat to make him pay for Taze's death, for Nalnish's captivity, for all the pain and loss and stolen years. But something in Thornwood's face stopped her. He was not afraid. He was not defensive. He was simply waiting, accepting whatever judgment she chose to deliver. "Why didn't you refuse?" she whispered, the knife still inches from his skin. "If you knew it was wrong, why didn't you refuse the order?" "I tried. I was court-martialed for insubordination, stripped of my commission, everything I'd worked for gone. But it wasn't enough. Refusing didn't save him. It didn't change anything." His voice broke. "I should have done more. I should have warned him. I should have let him escape. I should have shot Coulter instead. I have lived with those shoulds every day since." Slowly, Ayasha lowered the knife, not because she forgave him, but because she recognized the truth in his words. He was broken in the same way she was broken, haunted by the same ghosts. And killing him would not bring Taze back, would not free Nalnish, would not change anything except to add more violence to an already blood-soaked history. "Taze's last words," she said, her voice hollow. "What were they? Exactly?" Thornwood closed his eyes, remembering. He said, "Tell Ayasha I tried. Tell Nalnish his father loved him more than breath. And tell the white soldier with sad eyes that I forgive him because hate is a poison we cannot afford to drink." He opened his eyes and they were wet. "I didn't understand that last part until much later. He was trying to save me. Even while dying, he was trying to save my soul." Ayasha turned away, unable to look at him anymore. The knife fell from her numb fingers and clattered on the floor. She heard herself making a sound, a keening wail that belonged to wounded animals and grieving mothers. Her knees buckled and she went down hard, folding into herself 2 years of held tears, finally breaking free in great gasping sobs. She felt Thornwood move, expected him to touch her to try to comfort her. But he didn't. He simply picked up a blanket from a cabinet, draped it around her shoulders, and then moved to the far side of the room, giving her space to break apart in private. It was a small kindness, but it was a kindness nonetheless. The first anyone had shown her in longer than she could remember. When she finally had no more tears left, when she was empty and hollow and exhausted, Ayasha spoke without looking at him. "I am Ayasha, wife of Taze, mother of Nalnish. I have been hiding for 2 years, living as Maria, afraid that if anyone discovered who I was, they would send me back to San Carlos, and I would never see my son again. He is at the Phoenix boarding school. They have him. They are erasing him." "I know." Thornwood's voice was gentle. "I've known since the first week I arrived in Silver Creek. Your son's name is on the enrollment list. Nalnish, son of Taze, and Ayasha, whereabouts of mother unknown. I've been trying to find a way to help you, but the boarding school system is protected by federal law. I have no authority over them." Ayasha lifted her head, looked at him with red, swollen eyes. "Then what good are you? What good is any of this?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know that giving up is not the answer. And I know that Taze asked me to protect you, so that's what I'm going to do, however I can, for as long as you'll let me." She should have told him to leave, should have returned to the shadows where she had learned to survive. But something in his words, in the way he stood there accepting her rage without deflection, made her reconsider. Perhaps being Maria Gonzalez, the invisible seamstress, was its own kind of death. Perhaps hiding was just another form of surrender. "My mother," she said finally, her voice raw. "She is on the reservation, old, sick. I have not seen her in 2 years. She paused, weighing how much more to reveal. "And there are others, people who might help me reach Nalnish, but I cannot get to them alone. The pass system, the guards—" She met his eyes. "I need access, legal access, the kind that only someone with your authority can provide." Thornwood nodded. "We'll go tomorrow. I'll say you're my new assistant there to assess supply needs. No one will question it." He paused. "Ayasha, I can't promise I can get your son back, but I promise I will try, and I promise I will not betray you. On Taze's memory, I swear it." It was not enough. It could never be enough. But it was something. And something was more than she had before. That night alone in her house, Ayasha took out her wooden box one last time. She removed the lock of Nalnish's hair and tied it into a small leather pouch that she hung around her neck next to her skin. Tomorrow she would step back into the world she had fled. Tomorrow she would become Ayasha again, not in secret, but in the open with an unlikely ally at her side. She did not know if Ethan Thornwood was truly trustworthy. She did not know if his guilt and his promises would hold when tested, but she knew that she could not save her son alone. And she knew that Taze, in his final moments, had seen something in this white soldier worth saving. Perhaps that meant something. Perhaps it meant everything. As dawn broke over the Gila River once more, Ayasha did not perform her morning ritual. Instead, she packed a bag with a change of clothes, wrapped a blue shawl around her shoulders, and waited for Thornwood to arrive. When his wagon pulled up in front of her house, she stepped outside without hesitation, climbed onto the seat beside him, and said in Apache, "Let's go. I'm ready." He nodded, snapped the reins, and the wagon rolled forward. They traveled in silence for the first hour, the desert landscape stretching out around them in shades of gold and rust. The morning was cool, the sky endless and blue. Finally, as they crested a rise and the distant mountains came into view, Thornwood spoke. "There's something you should know about why I'm really here. Why I accepted the position as Indian agent." Ayasha looked at him, waiting. "After Taze died, after I was court-martialed, I spent a year drifting, drinking, trying to forget, but I couldn't. His face haunted me. His last words haunted me. So I wrote to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and told them I wanted to work on reform from the inside. I told them the reservation system was broken and that I wanted to fix it. They didn't believe me. They thought I was naive. But they needed agents, and I spoke Apache, so they sent me here." He glanced at her. "I'm not here to control your people. I'm here to undermine the system, to find ways around it, to document the abuses and send reports to anyone who might listen. It's slow and dangerous and probably futile, but it's all I have." Ayasha absorbed this. "You are a fool," she said flatly. "Yes. The system will crush you. The government will remove you when you become too much trouble. Probably. And yet you do this anyway." "Yes." He met her eyes. "Because Taze was right. Hate is a poison we cannot afford to drink. And the only antidote I know is to try to do better. To be better." They rode on. The reservation appeared in the distance, a sprawl of canvas tents and rough wooden structures surrounded by wire fences and guard towers. It looked less like a home and more like a prison, which Ayasha supposed was exactly what it was. As they approached the gate, Thornwood pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Your pass. It identifies you as agency staff. Keep it with you always." Ayasha took the document, studied her false name written in careful script. Maria Gonzalez, assistant to the Indian agent. It was a lie that granted her freedom. The irony was not lost on her. The guard at the gate waved them through without interest, and then they were inside. The smell hit her first. Unwashed bodies, smoke from cooking fires, the sour tang of despair. Apache families huddled in the shade of inadequate shelters, their faces gaunt from hunger, their eyes hollow. Children with distended bellies played listlessly in the dirt. Elders sat unmoving, staring at nothing, waiting for death. This was what had become of the Chiricahua. This was the fate the United States government had decided was appropriate for a people who had committed the crime of defending their homeland. Ayasha climbed down from the wagon, her legs unsteady. She had known it was bad, but seeing it, smelling it, feeling the weight of it was different than knowing. This was hell, and her people were trapped in it with no hope of escape. Thornwood stood beside her, his face grim. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry you have to see this. I'm sorry it exists at all." Ayasha did not respond. She was already walking toward the cluster of tents where she knew her mother would be, her heart in her throat, preparing herself for whatever she would find. She found Desba sitting outside a tent so threadbare it provided almost no shelter from the sun. Her mother had aged a decade in the 2 years since Ayasha had seen her. Her hair was completely white now, her body bent and frail. But when she looked up and saw her daughter approaching, her eyes blazed with joy and recognition. "Ayasha." The name was a prayer, a benediction. "Shideja, my daughter, you came back." Ayasha dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around her mother, feeling bones and not much else. They held each other without speaking, rocking slightly, two women who had survived too much and lost too much and were still somehow breathing. When they finally pulled apart, Desba cupped Ayasha's face in her gnarled hands. "You look tired, you look sad, but you look alive. That is enough." "I saw Nalnish's letter," Ayasha said, her voice breaking. "About the war shirt, about Papa's war shirt in the boarding school." Desba's expression darkened. Yes, I heard the same from others whose children wrote. The white teachers use our sacred things to teach shame. They show our children the clothing of warriors and say, "This is what savages wore. This is what you must leave behind." It is a theft of souls. Ayasha felt fresh rage kindle in her chest. I want to take it back. I want to take Nalnish back. I want to burn that school to the ground. I know, but you are one woman, and they are an army. Desba glanced past Ayasha to where Thornwood stood at a respectful distance waiting. Who is that man? He wears the badge of an Indian agent, but he looks at you like he owes you something. It's complicated, Ayasha said. He was there when Taze died, but he tried to stop it. He failed. Now he is trying to make amends. Desba studied Thornwood for a long moment, her old eyes shrewd. Can he be trusted? I don't know yet, but I think Taze thought so, and Taze was rarely wrong about people. Her mother nodded slowly. Then listen to what I tell you now. There is a network, a secret network of mothers and grandmothers who help children escape the boarding schools. We call it the railroad, like the escaped slaves used in the old times. We send messages, we create false papers, we move children across the border into Mexico, where the American government cannot reach them. It is dangerous. Many have been caught and punished, but some have succeeded. If you truly want to save Nalnish, you must speak to Key. He coordinates the railroad. Ayasha's heart leaped. Key is here. He comes and goes. He pretends to be a simple old man, harmless and beneath notice, but he is neither. He will be at the evening meal distribution. Find him. Tell him I sent you. Tell him you are ready. They talked for hours, Ayasha absorbing every detail of life on the reservation, learning the rhythms and routines, memorizing the names of guards and sympathetic staff, filing away information she might need later. When the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, she reluctantly stood to leave. I will come back, she promised, as often as I can. I know. Desba smiled, and in that smile Ayasha saw the mother she remembered from childhood, the woman who had taught her to weave and bead, who had told her stories of the old days when the Chiricahua had been free to move across the land like water following the seasons and the game. Go now, do what you must do, but remember, daughter, we are still here. They have taken much, but they have not taken everything. We remember who we are, and as long as we remember, we survive. Ayasha found Key exactly where her mother had said, overseeing the distribution of the evening rations, such as they were: moldy flour, rancid bacon, coffee grounds mixed with dirt, barely enough to keep a person alive, much less healthy. She approached him carefully, aware that guards were watching, aware that any overt connection between them would raise suspicion. My mother sends her greetings, she said in Apache, making it sound casual, unremarkable. She said you might have work for someone with my skills. Key did not look at her directly, but she saw the corner of his mouth lift fractionally. Your skills are well known, but the work is dangerous. Many who attempt it do not succeed. I understand, but I have motivation. My son is at Phoenix. Now Key did look at her, his ancient eyes sharp and assessing. Phoenix is one of the most heavily guarded schools. Many have tried to retrieve children from there. Few have succeeded. What makes you think you can do what they could not? Ayasha glanced toward where Thornwood stood by the wagon waiting for her. Because I have access, and I have someone on the inside, someone who owes a debt. Key followed her gaze, then nodded slowly. The new Indian agent, Thornwood. I have heard things about him. He defended me in the town, spoke our language, showed respect. But he wears the badge of the government. How can he be trusted? I don't know if he can, Ayasha admitted. But I know he will try. And trying might be enough. Trying might also get you killed, get your son killed, get many others killed if the network is exposed. Key studied her for a long moment. Are you willing to risk that? To risk everything on the word of a white soldier who feels guilty? Ayasha thought of Nalnish's letter, thought of the war shirt locked behind glass, thought of her son forgetting the word for mother in his own language. "Yes," she said, "I am willing to risk everything, because doing nothing is not an option anymore. Doing nothing is just another form of death." Key was silent, weighing her words, weighing her determination. Finally he said, "Come back in 3 days, alone. Tell Thornwood you need to gather supplies from the reservation stores. At midday, when the guards change shifts, meet me behind the old water tower on the east side. We will talk then. But understand this, if I believe for even a moment that you or Thornwood are a threat to the railroad, you will both disappear. We protect the many over the few, always." "I understand." "Good." Key turned back to the ration distribution as if they had never spoken. "Go now, and walk carefully. The ground here is full of snakes, some of them wearing human skin." Ayasha returned to the wagon where Thornwood waited. He helped her up onto the seat, without comment started the horses moving toward the gate. They were halfway back to Silver Creek before he finally spoke. "You found what you needed?" "Yes, but it is going to require your help. And it is going to be dangerous. You could lose your position. You could be arrested. You could be killed." Thornwood glanced at her, his expression calm. "I could also do nothing, and live with the knowledge that I had a chance to help and I was too afraid to take it. That seems worse than death to me. You barely know me. You barely know my son. Why would you risk so much?" "Because Taze asked me to. Because it is the right thing to do. Because I'm tired of being part of the problem." He paused. "And because maybe in some small way helping you will help me find a reason to keep breathing. Guilt is a heavy companion. I'd like to trade it for something lighter, like purpose." They rode on through the gathering dusk, the desert cooling around them, stars beginning to appear in the vast sky overhead. Ayasha felt the leather pouch containing Naalnish's hair against her skin, warm from her body heat, a physical reminder of what she was fighting for. 3 days, she said. "We need to go back to the reservation in 3 days. Alone, without official business. Can you arrange that?" "Yes. I'll say I need to make an unscheduled inspection. It happens often enough that no one will question it." He looked at her. "What are we walking into?" "A choice. A chance. And possibly a trap." She met his eyes. "Are you still willing?" Thornwood smiled, and it was a sad smile but genuine. "Always. For Taze. For Naalnish. For you. For all of it." And in that moment, sitting beside this broken white soldier who carried the death of her husband on his conscience, Ayasha made a decision. She would trust him. Not completely, not blindly, but enough. Enough to take the first step on a path that might lead to freedom or might lead to disaster. But either way, it was movement. It was action. It was the opposite of the slow death of resignation. "Then we do this together," she said. "Whatever happens, we face it together." "Together," Thornwood agreed. The word hung in the air between them like a promise, like a vow, like the beginning of something neither of them fully understood, but both recognized as necessary. The road stretched out ahead, disappearing into the darkness full of unknown dangers and impossible odds. But they would walk it anyway. Because sometimes the only choice that matters is the choice to keep moving forward even when you cannot see where the path leads. Behind them, the reservation faded into the distance, a place of suffering and endurance. Ahead of them, somewhere in the vast territory, a 6-year-old boy named Naalnish was forgetting his language, forgetting his name, forgetting his mother. But not for much longer. Not if Ayasha had anything to say about it. And now, for the first time in 2 years, she had an ally. Someone who understood the weight of the fight. Someone who was willing to carry part of the burden. It was not much. But it was a beginning, and sometimes a beginning is all you need to change everything. 3 days passed like water through cupped hands, too fast and too slow at the same time. Ayasha spent the hours preparing, thinking through every possible scenario, every potential betrayal, every way the meeting with Key could go wrong. She sharpened her knife. She packed a small bag with supplies. She wrote a letter to Naalnish that she would probably never be able to send, pouring out all the words she had kept locked inside for 2 years. Then she burned it because words on paper were evidence, and evidence could get people killed. On the morning of the 3rd day, Ethan Thornwood arrived at her house before dawn. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes suggesting he had slept as poorly as she had. But his jaw was set with determination, and when he helped her onto the wagon, his hand was steady. They traveled in silence again, but this time the quiet felt different, charged, like the air before lightning strikes. Ayesha found herself watching him from the corner of her eye. This man who had killed and tried to save her husband in the same breath, this contradiction wrapped in flesh and guilt and stubborn hope. She wondered what Taze would think of her sitting beside him now, working with him, trusting him with her son's future. She wanted to believe her husband would approve. She needed to believe it. The reservation looked no better in daylight than it had 3 days ago. If anything, it looked worse. A child's cough echoed across the compound, wet and rattling, the sound of lungs filling with fluid. 2 women carried a body wrapped in canvas toward the burial ground at the edge of the wire fence. Life and death happening simultaneously, overlapping, indistinguishable from each other in this place. Thornwood signed them in at the gate, his face carefully neutral as he exchanged words with the guard. The man barely glanced at Ayesha. To him she was just another Apache beneath notice, irrelevant. The invisibility that had protected her for 2 years now served her again. She was learning that survival often meant becoming whatever people expected to see, reflecting back their assumptions so they never looked deeper. They moved through the compound slowly, Thornwood making a show of inspecting supply tents and checking inventory lists. He played his role perfectly, the conscientious Indian agent doing his duty. No one watching would suspect he was here for any other purpose. Ayesha stayed 2 steps behind him, eyes down the model of a subservient assistant. But she was counting guards, noting their routines, mapping escape routes in her mind. Old habits from the years before the reservation, when the Chiricahua had lived as hunted people, always ready to run. At midday, when the sun was at its highest and the guards retreated to shade to eat their meals, Ayesha slipped away. Thornwood created a distraction, loudly arguing with a supply clerk about missing flour shipments, drawing attention to himself. In the confusion, she became a shadow moving between tents, using the pathways her mother had described, heading toward the old water tower on the eastern edge of the compound. Key was already there, sitting in the dust with his back against the tower's support beam, looking for all the world like an old man dozing in the heat. But his eyes were open and alert when Ayesha approached, and his hand rested on something concealed beneath his threadbare blanket. A weapon, she guessed. He would not be taken easily if this was a trap. "You came," he said in Apache, his voice barely above a whisper, "and alone as instructed. Good. Thornwood is creating a distraction. We have perhaps 20 minutes before someone notices I am gone." Ayesha crouched beside him, her back to the tower, her eyes scanning the compound. "My mother says you coordinate the railroad. I need to know if it can reach Phoenix." Key studied her for a long moment, his ancient face unreadable. "Phoenix is difficult. The school is run by a man named Pratt, a former cavalry officer who believes he is saving Indian children by destroying everything that makes them Indian. He is zealous, cruel, and very careful. Security is tight. Children are counted 3 times a day. Runaways are punished publicly to discourage others." He paused. "We have tried 4 times to extract children from Phoenix. 3 times we failed. The 4th time we succeeded, but 2 of our people were caught and hanged for kidnapping." Ayesha felt ice in her stomach but kept her voice steady. "And yet you continue to try. Because the alternative is to abandon our children to erasure. That is not acceptable." Key shifted slightly and Ayesha heard the clink of metal. Definitely a weapon. "But we must be strategic. We cannot risk the entire network for 1 child, no matter how much his mother loves him. You understand this?" "I understand. But I also know that every child we save is a victory. Every child who remembers their language, their name, their people, is a form of resistance." Ayesha leaned closer. "And I have something you do not have. Access. Thornwood can enter the school legally as an Indian agent conducting inspections. He can map the interior. He can identify weaknesses. He can create opportunities. If he is truly willing, if he can be trusted. Key's eyes narrowed. You stake much on a white man's guilt. Guilt is a weak foundation. It crumbles under pressure. Then we will find out how deep his commitment runs. Ayesha pulled a folded paper from inside her shirt. Before we go further, you should know something. My son wrote to me about a war shirt in the school's museum, a shirt with blue beads. It belonged to my husband Taze. The cavalry took it when they killed him. Now they display it to teach Apache children shame. Key's expression darkened. Sacred items should not be imprisoned behind glass. This is desecration. Yes, and I want it back. Not just for myself, but for all of us. Every artifact they stole, every piece of our culture they locked away, it is theft. We have a right to reclaim what is ours. Ayesha's voice hardened. I propose this. Thornwood and I will go to Phoenix. He will conduct a legitimate inspection. During that inspection, we will map the school, locate my son, and retrieve the war shirt. Then, when we have the information we need, the railroad can plan a proper extraction, one that might actually succeed because we will know exactly what we are facing. Key was silent, considering. The sun beat down on them merciless and bright. Somewhere in the compound, someone was singing a song in Apache, the words muffled but the melody clear. A lullaby. A morning song, both at once. It is risky, Key said finally. If you are caught, if Thornwood betrays you, the entire network could be compromised. I have 40 people working across 3 territories, mothers hiding children, guides moving them to Mexico, safe houses along the routes. All of it could be destroyed. I know, but I also know that doing nothing guarantees failure. At least this way we try. At least this way we fight back. Ayesha met his eyes. I am not asking you to trust Thornwood. I am asking you to trust me. I am Chiricahua, daughter of the Wind People. I will die before I betray my people. You know this to be true. Key reached out and placed his weathered hand over hers. It was a gesture of acceptance, of solidarity. Your mother speaks well of you. Your husband died with honor. These things matter. Very well. I will bring your proposal to the others who coordinate the railroad. If they agree, we will provide you with what you need. False papers, contact names, emergency escape routes. But understand this, if the mission fails, you are on your own. We cannot risk exposure to mount a rescue. You will be sacrificed for the greater good. I understand and accept these terms. There is one more thing you should know. Key glanced around, ensuring they were still unobserved. The railroad is not just about moving children. We are also documenting abuses, gathering evidence. We have a contact in the Eastern newspapers, a journalist who is sympathetic to our cause. If we can provide proof of what is happening in these schools, it might turn public opinion. It might create pressure for reform. He pulled a small leather journal from beneath his blanket, pressed it into her hands. Take this. Write down everything you see at Phoenix, every detail, every cruelty, every stolen artifact. Make them see what they have done. Sometimes a pen is as powerful as a gun. Ayesha took the journal, felt its weight, understood what he was asking. This was more than rescuing one child. This was about bearing witness, about creating a record that could not be erased or denied. I will write it all, she promised. Every word will be true. Then go. Your 20 minutes are almost gone. We will meet again in 1 week. Same place, same time. I will have an answer from the others by then. Key settled back against the water tower, his eyes drifting closed, becoming once more just an old man napping in the heat. The transformation was so complete that Ayesha almost doubted the conversation had happened at all. She made her way back through the compound, slipping between tents, avoiding sight lines moving like smoke. When she emerged near the supply tents, Thornwood was still arguing with the clerk, though his eyes flicked to her, briefly registering her return with visible relief. He wound down the argument, made a show of marking something on his clipboard, then gestured for her to follow him back to the wagon. They did not speak until they were well away from the reservation, the guard towers disappearing behind a rise in the road. Then Thornwood let out a long breath. Well, it is possible, but dangerous, and we need to prove ourselves first. Ayesha explained the plan, watching his face as she laid out what would be required of him. To her surprise, he did not hesitate. When do we leave for Phoenix? Assuming Key and the others approve within 2 weeks. You will need to arrange the official inspection, get all the proper authorization papers. It has to look completely legitimate. I can do that. Thornwood was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins. Ayesha, there is something you need to know. Something I learned about Phoenix Industrial School. About who is funding it. She looked at him, sensing bad news in his tone. The school receives significant private donations from military families. Families who lost loved ones in the Apache Wars. They see the school as a continuation of the conflict, a way to finish what the cavalry started. Erasing Apache culture is to them a form of victory. He paused. One of the largest donors is Margaret Coulter. The name hit Ayesha like a physical blow. Coulter, as in Major Coulter, the man who killed Taze. His wife, yes. Thornwood's jaw tightened. I did not know when I took this position. I only discovered it 2 days ago while reviewing funding records. Margaret Coulter is one of the school's board members. She visits regularly. She has significant influence over its policies and practices. Ayesha felt rage and fear warring in her chest. Then she will be there. When we go, she might recognize you. It is possible. I have not seen her since the court-martial, but yes, she might remember me. And if she does, if she realizes I am working against the system instead of supporting it, she will act. She has the connections to have me arrested, dismissed, or worse. Thornwood looked at her. I am telling you this now so you can decide if you still want my help. I am a liability. My presence might endanger the mission. Ayesha was silent, thinking. Every instinct screamed at her to reject his help, to find another way to not risk everything on a man who came with so much dangerous baggage. But she also knew that she had no other way in, no other legitimate access to Phoenix, and time was running out. Every day Naalnish spent in that school was another day of erasure, another day of forgetting. We proceed, she said finally, but we prepare for the possibility of exposure. We need a contingency plan. A way to get out if things go wrong. Agreed. Thornwood seemed to relax slightly, as if he had been expecting her to abandon him. I will work on that. Multiple exit strategies. And Ayesha, if it comes down to a choice between completing the mission and saving yourself, you save yourself. I can be sacrificed. You cannot. Naalnish needs his mother. It was the right thing to say, the sensible thing. But Ayesha found herself thinking that this man, this guilt-ridden, broken soldier, had become something unexpected. Not quite a friend, not quite trustworthy, but perhaps an ally, perhaps someone worth saving alongside her son, if it came to that. They returned to Silver Creek as the sun was setting, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. Thornwood helped her down from the wagon, and for a moment their hands lingered together, a connection neither quite understood, but both felt. Then she pulled away, wrapped her shawl tight around her shoulders, and walked back to her small house alone. That night, Ayesha opened the leather journal Key had given her and began to write. Not about the mission, not yet, but about Taze, about how they had met when she was 16 and he was 20, both of them young and foolish and in love with the idea of freedom. About their wedding ceremony under the stars, blessed by her grandmother, sealed with prayers to the 4 directions. About the night Naalnish was born, how Taze had held their son and wept with joy, whispering promises in Apache about the life they would build together. She wrote about the cavalry coming, about the desperate flight toward Mexico that had ended in gunfire and death. She wrote about holding Taze's body, about feeling his last breath leave him, about the moment her heart had broken so completely she was surprised it still beat at all. And she wrote about the 2 years since the running and hiding and slow suffocation of living as someone else, as Maria the Mexican seamstress, with no past and no future. The words poured out of her like blood from a wound, dark and necessary. This was the power of testimony, she realized. This was how memory became weapon. By writing it down, she made it real, made it undeniable, made it matter. She filled 10 pages before exhaustion overtook her. She hid the journal beneath the floorboard with her other treasures, then lay down on her pallet and fell into a dreamless sleep that felt like dying and waking up at the same time. 1 week later, Ayasha returned to the reservation. Key was waiting at the water tower, and this time he was not alone. 2 other elders sat with him, a man and a woman, both with faces carved by hardship and eyes that missed nothing. They studied Ayasha in silence, assessing, judging, deciding if she was worthy of their trust. "This is Ayasha," Key said in Apache, "daughter of Desba, wife of Taze, mother of Nyalnish. She proposes to infiltrate Phoenix Industrial School with the help of the Indian agent Thornwood. She asks for our support." The woman spoke first, her voice like wind through dry grass. "I am Nez. I lost 3 grandchildren to the schools. 2 I will never see again. The 3rd we saved, but he is damaged. He wakes screaming. He has forgotten how to pray. The schools do not just take children, they break them." Her eyes bored into Ayasha. "You say this white man will help you, but white men lie. It is their nature. How do we know he will not betray us all?" "We do not know," Ayasha answered honestly. "But he carries guilt for my husband's death. And guilt can be a powerful motivator, especially when it is genuine." "Guilt can also be a trap," the man said. "His name was Goyakla, and he had been a warrior in the old days before the surrender. I have seen men use guilt to manipulate to gain trust before betrayal. How do we test this Thornwood? How do we know his heart?" Ayasha had anticipated this question. She had spent the week thinking about it, turning it over in her mind like a stone in her palm, examining it from every angle. "We test him by giving him a choice that will reveal his true nature." "What kind of choice?" Key asked. "We tell him that if he helps us infiltrate Phoenix, he will be asked to do something that will end his career as an Indian agent, something that will make him a criminal in the eyes of the government. Something irreversible." Ayasha leaned forward. "If he hesitates, if he tries to negotiate for a way to help us while protecting himself, then we know his commitment is limited. But if he accepts without hesitation, then we know he is willing to sacrifice everything. And that makes him worthy of our trust." The 3 elders exchanged glances, a silent conversation happening in the space between them. Finally, Nez nodded slowly. "This is wise. We agree. Bring Thornwood here. Tomorrow. We will present him with the choice, and we will see what kind of man he truly is." The next day unfolded like a ceremony, each moment weighted with significance. Thornwood arrived at the reservation alone as Ayasha had instructed. She met him at the gate and led him through the compound, not to the water tower this time, but to a tent at the far edge where the 3 elders waited. Thornwood's face was calm, but Ayasha could see tension in his shoulders in the way his hand kept drifting toward the empty space where a gun would have been. He was walking into the unknown, and he knew it. Inside the tent, the elders sat in a semicircle. Ayasha and Thornwood stood before them, and for a long moment no one spoke. The silence stretched, became uncomfortable, became a test in itself. Finally, Key broke the quiet. "Ethan Thornwood, you were a soldier. You killed Apache people. Now you claim to want to help us. Why should we believe you?" Thornwood did not flinch from the question. "You should not believe me. Words are cheap, but actions can be measured. I am here. I am asking for the chance to prove myself through what I do not, what I say." "Pretty words still," Goyakla said. "A man can speak of action without ever acting. We need more than willingness. We need proof of commitment." "Then tell me what proof you require." Thornwood's voice was steady. "I will provide it." Nez leaned forward, her eyes glittering in the dim light filtering through the tent walls. "If you help us infiltrate Phoenix School, you will be asked to steal federal property, to falsify government records, to aid in what the law calls kidnapping. Your career will be over. You will be hunted. You may be imprisoned or killed. There will be no going back to your comfortable position, your salary, your government protection. You will become one of us, hunted, despised, erased. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Knowing this, do you still offer your help? The tent fell silent again. Ayesha held her breath, watching Thornwood's face, searching for signs of hesitation, of second thoughts, of the self-preservation that defined most men when pushed to the edge of a cliff. She found none. I do, Thornwood said simply. I offer my help knowing full well what it will cost. Because some things are worth more than safety. Some things are worth more than a career or a reputation or even a life. Doing what is right is one of those things. And Taze asked me to protect his family. I intend to honor that request regardless of the price. Goyakla stood, walked to Thornwood and studied him up close, as if he could see through flesh to the truth beneath. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled a knife from his belt, a worn blade that had seen decades of use, and drew it across his own palm. Blood welled up dark and red. He held out the knife to Thornwood. In the old way before the reservation, we sealed oaths in blood. We showed that our commitment was not just words, but life. If you are willing to bleed for this cause, then I will believe your words match your heart. Thornwood took the knife without hesitation. He drew it across his own palm, a quick, clean cut, then held out his hand. Goyakla clasped it, their blood mingling, and spoke in Apache. You are bound now. Bound by blood to the Apache people. Bound to fight our fight. Bound to die if necessary for our children's freedom. Do you accept this oath? I accept. Thornwood spoke the words in Apache, and hearing his voice shape her language with such care and precision, Ayesha felt something shift in her chest. This was not just an alliance of convenience. This was something deeper, something sacred. The elders conferred quietly among themselves, then Key spoke for all of them. We accept you, Ethan Thornwood. You will work with Ayesha to infiltrate Phoenix. We will provide you with everything you need. But know this, if you betray us, if you lead soldiers to our people, there is nowhere you can run where we will not find you. We have a long memory for betrayal, and justice delayed is still justice. I understand, and I will not betray you. On my life, I swear it. They spent the next 2 hours planning. Key laid out the structure of the railroad, explained how messages were passed, how routes were established, how children were moved from point to point until they crossed into Mexico and freedom. Nez provided detailed information about Phoenix School that had been gathered over years of patient intelligence work. Guard schedules, teacher routines, weaknesses in the perimeter, the location of the dormitories where children slept, and crucially, the existence of a basement level where confiscated items were stored, items deemed too dangerous for Indian children to possess. Sacred objects, ceremonial clothing, weapons, the accumulated cultural heritage of a people locked away and labeled as relics of savagery. Goyakla gave them something else, a small leather pouch containing a powder made from ground herbs. If you are caught, if you are questioned, put this powder in their coffee or their water. It will make them sleep deeply. It will buy you time to escape. Use it only in emergency. It is precious and difficult to make. As the sun began to set and the meeting drew to a close, Ayesha felt the weight of what they were about to attempt settle fully onto her shoulders. This was real now, no longer theoretical. They had allies, resources, a plan, and in 2 weeks they would put that plan into action, walking into the heart of enemy territory with nothing but courage and desperation to protect them. Thornwood and Ayesha left the reservation together as the stars began to appear overhead. They rode in silence for a long while, both processing what had happened, what they had committed to. Finally, Thornwood spoke. Thank you for vouching for me, for giving me this chance. Do not thank me yet. We may both die for this. Or worse, we may fail, and Naalnish will pay the price for our arrogance in thinking we could succeed where others have failed. We will not fail. Thornwood's voice carried a certainty that Ayesha wanted desperately to believe. We cannot afford to fail. Too much depends on it. You have changed, Ayesha observed, looking at him in the moonlight. When we first met, you were a man drowning in guilt. Now you are something else. What happened?" Thornwood was quiet, considering. "I think I finally understood something. Guilt is selfish. It is about my pain, my regret, my burden. But action, real action that helps others, that is something larger than myself. It is about Nyalnish, about all the children trapped in those schools, about justice and resistance and refusing to accept the world as it is." He glanced at her. "You did that. You showed me the difference between wallowing in guilt and actually doing something meaningful. So thank you for that." Ayasha felt heat rise in her face, an unfamiliar sensation after so long living in emotional isolation. She was not sure what to call what was developing between them. Not love, certainly not that. Too much pain and history and complicated grief stood between them for love. But perhaps respect. Perhaps the beginning of something that could become friendship or partnership or some other word that had not yet been invented to describe two people bound together by blood oaths and shared purpose. "When this is over," she said quietly, "when Nalnish is free, what will you do? Where will you go?" "I have not thought that far ahead. Honestly, I am not certain I will survive this. The odds are not good." Thornwood smiled, but it was a sad smile. "But if I do survive, I suppose I will go wherever I can be useful, wherever there is injustice to fight and people who need help. Maybe Mexico with the children who have escaped, maybe back east to testify before Congress about what I have seen, maybe nowhere at all. Maybe I will disappear into the desert and let the land reclaim me. That is a lonely future. Loneliness is not the worst thing. Complicity is worse. Silence is worse. Doing nothing while evil flourishes, that is the worst thing of all." They reached Silver Creek, and Thornwood left her at her door with a simple good night. But before he turned to go, he said one more thing. "Ayasha, if something happens to me during the mission, if I am captured or killed, there is a lockbox in my office. The key is hidden in the third book on the shelf, a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets. Inside the lockbox are documents, evidence of abuses on the reservation, names of corrupt officials, financial records showing stolen rations and embezzled funds, and letters I have written to newspapers and politicians and anyone who might listen, ready to be mailed. If I die, promise me you will send those letters. Promise me my death will count for something." "I promise," Ayasha said, and she meant it. This man had become important, she realized. Not romantically, not in the way of lovers, but important nonetheless. He was a witness to her truth, an ally in a war most people refused to acknowledge was even being fought, and in this hard land, in this brutal time that made him precious beyond measure. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Thornwood secured official authorization for an inspection tour of Phoenix Industrial School, citing concerns about financial irregularities and the need for oversight. He prepared false documents identifying Ayasha as a translator and cultural liaison, someone necessary for communicating with the Apache children. He mapped routes, established safe houses along the way, and memorized every detail of the plan until he could recite it in his sleep. Ayasha spent her time gathering supplies, clothes that could be layered for fast travel, dried food that would not spoil, the sleeping powder from Goyakla carefully wrapped and hidden, and the journal, always the journal where she continued to write Nilnish's story, Taze's story, her own story, bearing witness to a history that too many people wanted to forget. She also spent time with her mother at the reservation, visiting as often as she dared, storing up memories in case this mission was the last thing she ever did. Desba seemed to sense the danger ahead, and one afternoon she gave Ayasha a gift. A small medicine bag hand-sewn from soft leather decorated with beads in the colors of the 4 directions. "Your grandmother made this for me when I was your age," Desba said, pressing it into Ayasha's hands. She said it contained protection, not magic because we are not foolish people who believe in magic, but intention, love, the concentrated hope of all the mothers who came before you wanting their daughters to survive. Wear it. Let it remind you that you do not walk alone. You carry all of us with you. Ayasha fastened the medicine bag around her neck next to the pouch containing Nyalnish's hair. She was becoming a walking archive of memory, her body a vessel for everything precious that had been taken or was in danger of being lost. It felt right. It felt like purpose. On the night before they were to leave for Phoenix, Ayasha could not sleep. She stood outside her small house looking up at the stars, thinking about her son. Was he looking at the same stars? Did he remember the stories she had told him about the constellations, the Apache stories that were different from the white man's stories that spoke of creation and connection and the web of relationships that bound all living things together? She heard footsteps and turned to find Thornwood approaching a bundle in his hands. "Could not sleep either," he said by way of greeting. "I thought you might want this." He held out the bundle. Inside was fabric. Blue fabric, the exact shade of the beads on Taze's war shirt. "I had it made in town," Thornwood explained. "I thought when we get the war shirt back you might want to make something new from something that matches. A connection between past and future. I do not know if that is foolish, but it felt right." Ayasha took the fabric, felt its softness, and for the first time in 2 years she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond survival. A future where Nyalnish was free, where they could build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. It was a dangerous hope, the kind that could break you if it did not come true. But it was also necessary. Without hope, what was the point of fighting at all? "Thank you," she said, and the words carried more weight than 2 syllables should bear. "This is a good gift." They stood together in the darkness, 2 people on the edge of an impossible task, and in that moment Ayasha made a decision. She reached out and took Thornwood's hand, held it briefly, then released it. It was not romance. It was acknowledgement. "You are here. I am here. We are in this together. That is enough. That is everything." "Tomorrow we go," she said. "Tomorrow we begin." "Tomorrow we begin," Thornwood echoed, and though neither of them said it aloud, both knew what the unspoken words were. Tomorrow we begin, and we do not know if we will return, but we go anyway, because some fights are worth dying for, and saving children, saving culture, saving memory, that is the worthiest fight of all. The journey to Phoenix took 4 days. 4 days of riding through desert landscape that shifted from red rock formations to saguaro forests to dust-swept plains that stretched toward mountains blue with distance. 4 days of Ayasha rehearsing her role as translator, memorizing the false history Thornwood had created for her, becoming Maria Gonzalez so completely that Ayasha could hide beneath the surface like a stone at the bottom of a clear river, present but invisible. They traveled slowly, stopping each night at predetermined locations where Key's network had arranged safe shelter. Sometimes it was a sympathetic rancher's barn, sometimes a cave known only to the Apache marked with subtle signs that most white men would never notice. And once memorably an abandoned mission church where the walls still bore faded paintings of saints who looked more indigenous than European, as if the artists had understood something about divinity that the priests had not. On the 3rd night, camped beneath an overhang that protected them from the wind, Thornwood finally asked the question Ayasha had been waiting for. "When you see Nyalnish, what will you say to him?" Ayasha stared into the small fire they had built, watching the flames dance and shift. "I do not know if I will be able to say anything. We must be careful. If he shows recognition, if he calls me mother in front of the teachers, everything falls apart." She paused, her throat tight. "I will have to look at my son and pretend he is a stranger. I will have to walk past him as if he means nothing. That may be harder than anything else we face." "Perhaps not." Thornwood pulled something from his pack, a small wooden carving of a horse. "I made this. It is similar to toys Apache children play with. If you can give it to him, maybe slip it to him somehow, he will know it came from you. A message without words." Ayasha took the carving, felt the smoothness of the wood, the careful detail of the mane and tail. This man had sat by firelight carving this gift for a child he had never met, a child whose father he had failed to save. The weight of that gesture settled in her chest, heavy and warm. "You would have been a good father," she said quietly. Thornwood looked away, pain flickering across his face. "I will never know. That path is closed to me now. But perhaps I can be something else. An uncle in the Apache way. A protector. Someone who stands between children and harm. He met her eyes. Would that be acceptable to call myself uncle to Nyalnish if we succeed in freeing him? You would take that responsibility, knowing it means you can never return to the world you came from, knowing you would be tied to us to our struggle for the rest of your life. I am already tied to you. The blood oath with Goyakla bound me. But more than that, I choose this binding. I choose to be part of something larger than my own guilt and redemption. I choose family even if it is not the traditional kind. He smiled, and it reached his eyes this time. Besides, I have discovered that the world I came from was built on lies and violence. Why would I want to return to that? They sat in companionable silence, and Ayasha found herself thinking about the strangeness of this alliance. A white soldier and an Apache widow brought together by death and duty, now planning to commit what the government would call crimes, but what they knew to be acts of justice. The world had gone mad, she decided. Or perhaps it had always been mad, and she was only now seeing it clearly. On the morning of the fourth day, Phoenix appeared on the horizon. The city was larger than Silver Creek, more established with proper streets and buildings made of brick rather than adobe. And on the northern edge, separated from the city proper by a stretch of empty land, stood Phoenix Indian Industrial School. It looked like a prison. That was Ayasha's first thought as they approached. High walls surrounded the compound, guard towers at each corner, a single gate with armed sentries. Inside, she could see rows of identical buildings, sterile and institutional, designed to strip away individuality and replace it with conformity. Children moved between buildings in straight lines, dressed in identical uniforms, their hair cut short, their faces blank with the learned expression of people who had discovered that showing emotion only brought punishment. Somewhere in there was Nyalnish. Somewhere behind those walls was her son, and she was so close to him now that it felt like her heart might tear itself free from her chest and fly to him, homing instinct stronger than reason or safety. Thornwood must have sensed her distress because he reached over and briefly touched her hand. Steady. We are almost there. But we must play our roles perfectly. No mistakes. Too many lives depend on it. She nodded, swallowed her fear and rage, and desperate love pushed it all down into the hidden place where she had learned to store emotions too dangerous to express. Maria Gonzalez looked at the school with mild interest, nothing more. Ayasha, the Apache mother, waited beneath the surface, coiled and ready. They presented their papers at the gate. The guard examined them with bureaucratic thoroughness, compared the descriptions to their faces, asked questions about their purpose. Thornwood handled it all with calm authority, the perfect image of a dedicated Indian agent conducting routine oversight. After 10 minutes that felt like 10 hours, they were waved through. The compound was even more oppressive on the inside. Everything was rigid, controlled, measured. Children walked in lines, never speaking. Teachers patrolled with switches, ready to strike any child who stepped out of line or spoke in their native language. Ayasha saw a young girl, perhaps 8 years old, stumble slightly. A teacher immediately descended on her, striking her across the back with the switch, hissing about clumsiness and the need for discipline. The girl did not cry out. She had learned that lesson already. A man approached them, tall and thin, with wire-rimmed spectacles and the bearing of someone who believed absolutely in his own righteousness. "Agent Thornwood, I presume. I am Richard Pratt, director of this institution. Welcome to Phoenix Industrial School." They shook hands, and Ayasha saw Thornwood's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He knew who Pratt was. Everyone in Indian country knew. Pratt was the architect of the boarding school system, the man who had coined the phrase, "Kill the Indian, save the man." He believed he was performing a humanitarian service, rescuing savage children from their primitive cultures. The fact that those children were being destroyed in the process was to him an acceptable cost. "Director Pratt, thank you for accommodating my inspection on such short notice." Thornwood gestured to Ayasha. "This is Maria Gonzalez, my translator. She will help me communicate with any children who have not yet fully learned English." Pratt's eyes slid over Ayasha with thinly veiled contempt. "Most of our children are quite fluent in English now. We do not tolerate the use of savage tongues here, but I suppose a translator may be useful for the few recent arrivals who are still, shall we say, linguistically challenged." He turned and began walking. "Come, I will show you our facilities. You will see that we are doing remarkable work here, transforming wild Indians into civilized citizens." The tour was a descent into institutionalized cruelty. Pratt showed them classrooms where Apache children sat in rows reciting English phrases by rote, their voices flat and mechanical. He showed them the industrial workshops where boys as young as 7 learned trades working with dangerous equipment for hours each day. He showed them the laundry facilities where girls scrubbed clothing until their hands bled, learning the skills that would make them suitable as domestic servants in white households. And through it all, Pratt narrated with pride, explaining how each element of the system was designed to break down tribal identity and replace it with Christian values and American work ethic. He spoke of the children as if they were clay, to be molded raw material, to be shaped, never once acknowledging that they were human beings with their own cultures, languages, families, and inherent worth. Ayasha kept her face neutral, but inside she was screaming. Every child she saw was a wound. Every blank face was a tragedy. And she was writing it all down in her mind, storing every detail for the journal Key had given her, bearing witness to atrocities committed in the name of civilization. They had been touring for nearly an hour when she finally saw him. Nalnish stood in a line of children waiting to enter the dining hall. He wore the same uniform as the others, his beautiful black hair cropped short, his feet in ill-fitting boots instead of the soft moccasins she had made him. He looked smaller than she remembered, thinner, his shoulders hunched in a way that spoke of someone who had learned to make himself small to avoid notice. But it was him, her son, her heart. The reason she continued breathing. She must have made some sound, some involuntary gasp or whimper, because Thornwood immediately stepped between her and Pratt's line of sight, asking a detailed question about the dietary program that forced the director to turn his attention away. It was quick thinking, and it gave Ayasha the seconds she needed to regain control, to push the mother back down and pull the translator up. When Pratt turned back, she was composed, professional, unremarkable. "I would like to interview some of the children," Thornwood said, "to assess their English proficiency and general well-being. Perhaps we could use one of the classrooms." Pratt frowned. "That is irregular. We do not typically allow outsiders to speak privately with our students." "I understand, but it is part of the official inspection protocol. Federal regulations require that I verify the children are being treated according to government standards." Thornwood's tone was mild but firm. "Unless you have something to hide." The implication hung in the air. Pratt's face reddened slightly. "Of course not. We have nothing to hide. We run a model institution." "Very well. You may use classroom 3, but I will remain present during the interviews." "Naturally," Thornwood agreed, though Ayasha could see the frustration in the set of his shoulders. They needed to speak to Nalnish alone without supervision. But Pratt was not going to make that easy. They conducted interviews for the next 2 hours. Child after child was brought into the classroom, asked questions about their living conditions, their education, their treatment. And child after child gave the same carefully rehearsed answers, speaking in stilted English, never complaining, never showing any emotion that might be construed as resistance. They had been well trained. Thornwood took notes, asked follow-up questions, played his role with meticulous attention to detail. And Ayasha sat beside him, translating when necessary, observing, cataloging the fear in every child's eyes, the way they flinched at sudden movements, the absolute terror of saying the wrong thing. Finally, as the afternoon light began to slant through the windows, Nalnish was brought in. He entered the classroom with his eyes down, hands clasped in front of him, the perfect picture of a subdued student. He sat in the chair Pratt indicated and waited, not looking at either Thornwood or Ayasha, trained not to make eye contact with authority figures without permission. "State your name," Pratt instructed. "Nathan Hill, sir." The voice was her son's, but the words were alien, the name a theft. "And how long have you been enrolled at Phoenix Industrial School?" 26 months, sir." "Are you learning useful skills here?" "Yes, sir. I am learning to read and write proper English." I am learning carpentry. I am learning to be a good American." It was like listening to a recording, a script that had been drilled into him until it replaced his own thoughts. Ayasha wanted to scream, wanted to grab him and run, wanted to burn this entire building to the ground. But she sat still, hands folded in her lap, face showing nothing. Thornwood asked several more standard questions, and Nalnish answered each one in the same flat, emotionless voice. Then, as if it had just occurred to him, Thornwood pulled the carved wooden horse from his pocket. "I found this earlier. Do you know which student it belongs to?" He held it out, and for the first time Nalnish looked up. His eyes met the carving, and something flickered in his face. Recognition, memory, a crack in the carefully constructed facade. "I do not know, sir," he said, but his hand had moved slightly, an involuntary reach toward the toy, before he caught himself and pulled back. Well, perhaps you could keep it safe until we find the owner." Thornwood set the horse on the desk between them. "As someone who is learning carpentry, you might appreciate the craftsmanship." Nalnish's eyes flicked to the horse, then to Thornwood, then for just a fraction of a second to Ayasha. And in that moment she saw it. He knew. He recognized her, even though she was dressed as a Mexican woman, even though they had not seen each other in 26 months, even though he had been taught to forget everything about his life before this place. Some part of him deep down remembered his mother. She wanted to weep with relief and despair in equal measure. Pratt, oblivious to the undercurrent, stood abruptly. "If you are finished, Agent Thornwood, I believe we have accommodated your inspection sufficiently for today. We have evening prayers soon, and the children must prepare." "Of course. Just one more question for Nathan, if I may." Thornwood leaned forward slightly. "I understand the school has a museum of sorts, cultural artifacts collected from various tribes. As part of my report, I should inspect those items, verify they are being stored properly. Can you tell me where this museum is located?" Nalnish's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He knew about the basement. He had written about it in his letter. And now he understood that this man, this Indian agent, was asking because he wanted to help. "It is in the basement, sir, below the main administrative building. There are many items there, things that belonged to our people before." He paused and then added so quietly it was almost a whisper, "Before we came here to be saved." The last words dripped with irony so subtle that Pratt missed it entirely, but Ayasha heard it clearly. Her son was still in there, still resisting in the only ways available to him. Pride swelled in her chest, fierce and painful. "Thank you, Nathan. You may return to your duties." Thornwood stood, and Nalnish rose as well. As the boy walked past the desk, his hand shot out quickly, snatching the wooden horse and concealing it in his pocket in one smooth motion. It happened so fast that Pratt, who was already organizing his papers, did not notice. But Ayasha noticed, and Nalnish, just before he left the room, glanced back at her one more time. His lips moved, forming two words in Apache, silent but clear. "Shima. Mother." She barely kept her composure, barely managed not to call out to him, not to run after him, not to destroy the entire plan for one moment of holding her child. But she held steady, and the moment passed and Nalnish was gone, led away by a stern-faced matron toward the dormitories. "Well," Pratt said, gathering his papers, "I trust you found everything in order. As you can see, we run a tight ship here. These children arrive as savages, and we transform them into productive members of society. It is God's work." "Indeed," Thornwood said, and Ayasha heard the ice beneath the word, the barely controlled fury. "I would like to see the basement now, the artifact collection." Pratt hesitated. "That area is not typically part of the tour. The items there are quite disturbing. Weapons, ceremonial objects used in heathen rituals, clothing decorated with symbols of violence. We keep them locked away to remind our students of the barbaric past they have been rescued from. Nevertheless, it is part of my inspection mandate. I must verify that federal property is being properly maintained." Thornwood's tone left no room for argument. Pratt's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Very well. Follow me." They descended into the basement through a narrow staircase at the back of the administrative building. The air grew cooler and damper as they went down, and when Pratt unlocked the heavy wooden door at the bottom, The smell that emerged was musty thick with the scent of old leather and dust and something else. Grief, Ayesha thought. The room smelled of grief. Pratt lit several lamps and the space came into view. It was larger than Ayesha had expected, with rows of wooden shelves and glass cases filled with artifacts, war clubs, bows and arrows, ceremonial masks, pottery decorated with intricate designs, baskets woven so finely they could hold water, the accumulated cultural heritage of dozens of tribes stolen and imprisoned, reduced to curiosities in a white man's collection. And there, in a case near the back, she saw it, Taze's war shirt. The blue beads caught the lamplight, glowing softly. She had sewn each one onto the leather with prayers for his protection, working late into the night while pregnant with Nalnish, her hands moving with love and hope and faith that the prayers would keep him safe. They had not. But seeing the shirt now, seeing that it had survived even though he had not, something inside her broke open. Thornwood was speaking, asking Pratt questions about provenance and storage conditions, but Ayesha heard none of it. She moved toward the case as if pulled by gravity, her hand reaching out to touch the glass that separated her from the last tangible piece of her husband. "That piece came from a raid 2 years ago," Pratt was saying. "Taken from a hostile warrior who was killed while resisting arrest. Quite a fine example of Apache craftsmanship, actually. We use it in lessons to show the children how their ancestors lived before they were brought into the light of civilization." "You desecrate his memory," Ayesha said. And only after the words left her mouth did she realize she had spoken aloud in English, dropping all pretense of being a meek translator. Pratt turned to her surprised. "I beg your pardon. This shirt." Her hand pressed against the glass. "It belonged to a man, a father, a husband. He wore it to protect his family. And you have imprisoned it here, turned it into a lesson in shame. That is desecration." "Maria," Thornwood said quietly, a warning. But Ayesha was beyond caring. 2 years of silence, 2 years of swallowing her rage and grief, 2 years of pretending to be someone else, and now standing in front of Taze's war shirt, all of it came pouring out. "These are not relics. These are not curiosities. These are pieces of people's souls. Every item in this room was stolen from someone who loved it, who made it with their own hands, who imbued it with meaning and memory. And you have locked them away like they are evidence of crimes instead of evidence of beauty and resistance and survival." Pratt's face had gone pale, then red. "Who are you? You are not just a translator." "No," Ayesha said, and she felt the last of Maria Gonzalez fall away like a shed skin. "I am Ayesha, wife of Taze, mother of Nalnish, and I have come to take back what you have stolen." The silence that followed was absolute. Thornwood moved first, stepping between Ayesha and Pratt, his hand going to the gun at his hip. "Director Pratt, I believe we have discovered serious irregularities in your artifact storage and acquisition procedures. I am going to have to file a formal complaint." Pratt laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Irregularities. You brought an Indian woman into my school under false pretenses. You are in league with the very savages we are trying to civilize. You are the criminal here, Thornwood." He moved toward the stairs. "Guards. I need guards in the basement immediately." But Thornwood was faster. He drew his gun, not pointing it at Pratt, but holding it ready. "I would not do that if I were you, Director. We can resolve this peacefully, or we can make it very difficult for everyone involved." Footsteps thundered above them. Pratt's shout had been heard. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before guards arrived, and the situation escalated beyond control. Ayesha made a decision. She picked up one of the lamps and hurled it at the glass case containing Taze's war shirt. The glass shattered, and she reached through, ignoring the cuts on her hands, and pulled the shirt free. She clutched it to her chest, felt the weight of it, the familiar texture of the leather, and for a moment she was back in the tent where they had made their home. Taze wearing this shirt, holding Nalnish, all of them together and whole and free. Footsteps on the stairs, voices shouting. Thornwood grabbed Ayesha's arm. "We need to move. Now!" But there was no way out except through the stairs, and guards were coming down. They were trapped. "The window!" Ayasha said, pointing to a small opening near the ceiling barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. "It leads to the outside." "You will never escape," Pratt hissed. "I will see you both hanged for this." Thornwood looked at the window, calculated odds, made a decision. He pulled the leather pouch Goyakla had given them from his pocket, opened it, and blew the powder directly into Pratt's face. The director gasped, inhaled the powder, and within seconds his eyes rolled back and he collapsed unconscious. "That will buy us 10 minutes, maybe 15. Thornwood holstered his gun and laced his fingers together. "Climb. I will boost you up." Ayasha tucked the war shirt into her clothing, placed her foot in Thornwood's hands, and let him lift her toward the window. The opening was even smaller than it looked, and she had to twist and contort to fit through, feeling skin scrape against rough stone. But she made it, emerging into the twilight air on the side of the building hidden from the main compound. Thornwood followed, pulling himself up with surprising agility for a man his size. They heard guards burst into the basement below, heard their confused shouts when they found Pratt unconscious and the prisoners gone. "They will search the compound," Thornwood said, already moving toward the perimeter wall. "We need to be outside the fence before they organize a proper pursuit." But as they ran, staying low and using buildings for cover, Ayasha realized something. "Na'al Nish, we cannot leave without him." "We have to. The plan was to scout first, then return with the railroad for the extraction. We are not prepared for a rescue tonight." "The plan has changed." Ayasha stopped running, turned to face him. "They know who I am now. They know what we tried to do. We will never get another chance. If we leave without him, they will move him to another school somewhere we will never find him. This is our only opportunity." Thornwood looked at her, looked at the compound behind them where alarms were beginning to sound, looked at the darkening sky. She could see him calculating, weighing the odds, understanding that she was right. They had one chance, this chance, now. "Where are the dormitories?" "East side. The boys are in the second building." "Then we go east." He pulled his gun again. "But if we are caught, I will claim I coerced you, that you had no choice. You will say I held you hostage. Understood? No, we succeed as one or fall as one. There is no middle ground. I will not let you take the blame alone." They ran. The compound was in chaos now. Guards were searching buildings, teachers were rounding up students to count them, and somewhere an alarm bell was ringing with frantic urgency. Ayasha and Thornwood used the confusion as cover, moving from shadow to shadow, two ghosts in the twilight. The boys' dormitory was a long, low building with barred windows and a single door. A guard stood outside, young and nervous, rifle in hand. Thornwood approached him with the confidence of authority. "I am Agent Thornwood. We have a situation in the basement. Director Pratt needs all available guards there immediately." The young guard hesitated. "But sir, I was told to watch the dormitory." "Now you are being told to assist with a security breach. Move, soldier." The guard obeyed, running toward the administrative building. The moment he was gone, Thornwood and Ayasha slipped inside. The dormitory held perhaps 40 boys ranging from age 6 to 14, all of them sitting on their narrow cots, eyes wide with fear and confusion at the commotion outside. And their third bed from the end was Na'alnish. He saw Ayasha and started to rise, but she held up a hand signaling him to wait. She could not just grab him and run. The other boys would see. They would tell. And some of them, the ones who had been here longest, who had forgotten their families and languages, who had learned that obedience brought survival, might even try to stop them. She moved quickly to Nalnish's bed, knelt beside him, spoke in rapid Apache. "We are leaving. Tonight. Now. Can you walk quietly? Can you trust me?" "Shima," he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "I knew you would come. I knew you would not forget me." "Never. I could never forget you. But we must hurry." She helped him into his boots, grabbed the thin blanket from his bed. Thornwood stood by the door watching, and then he did something unexpected. He looked at the other boys, all of them watching this strange scene unfold, and he spoke in Apache, clear and loud. "Anyone who wants to leave, who wants to go home to their families, come with us now. We cannot take everyone, but we will take as many as can keep up and stay quiet. This is your choice. Stay here and be safe or risk everything for a chance at freedom." For a long moment no one moved. Then a small boy, perhaps 7 years old, stood up. Then another. Then 3 more. In the end, 6 boys besides Nalnish rose from their beds, their faces set with determination and terror in equal measure. "This is madness," Ayasha hissed. "We planned for 1 child, not 7. Then we adapt." Thornwood opened the door, checked that the path was clear. Sometimes plans change. Sometimes you save who you can save and trust that it is enough. They moved out into the night, a strange procession of an Apache woman, a white Indian agent, and 7 Apache boys who had just made the most dangerous choice of their young lives. The alarm bells were still ringing. Searchlights were beginning to sweep the compound. They had perhaps 5 minutes before the organized search reached this area. Ayasha led them to the perimeter wall, to a section she had noted earlier where the stones were loose and crumbling. They climbed, the boys scrambling up with the agility of youth, Thornwood and Ayasha helping the smallest ones. Over the wall, and then they were running into the desert. Darkness, running toward freedom or death or whatever lay ahead. Behind them voices shouted. Someone had discovered the empty beds. Within minutes horses would be saddled and a proper pursuit would begin. 7 Indian children and 2 adults could not outrun mounted cavalry in open desert. They needed help. As if summoned by her thoughts, figures emerged from the darkness ahead. Key and 3 other Apache men leading horses, their faces grim with determination. "We heard the alarm," Key said. "We came to provide extraction, though we expected only 1 child, not 7. "Plans change." Thornwood gasped, out of breath from running. "Can you take them? Get them to the safe houses." "We can try. But with 7 children the journey will be slower, and they will send telegraph messages to every town and fort within 200 miles. We will be hunted." Key looked at the boys, saw their fear and their hope, and something in his weathered face softened. "But we do not abandon children. Load them on the horses, move fast, and pray to whatever gods still listen that we make it to the border." They lifted the boys onto horses, 2 to a mount, and Ayasha climbed up behind Nalnish, wrapping her arms around her son, feeling his small body pressed against hers. Real, solid, hers. "Shima," he whispered in Apache. "I was so afraid I would forget everything. Forget our language, forget you, forget who I am. You did not forget. You are Nalnish. You are Chiricahua Apache. You are my son, and no one can take that from you, no matter how hard they try." Key gave the signal, and they rode, pushing the horses hard, heading south toward Mexico and the promise of sanctuary. Behind them the school was fully mobilized, now horses pouring out of the gate riders fanning out across the desert. The hunt had begun. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and give the children water. The desert was vast and dark, but Key knew the paths, the hidden ways that the Apache had used for generations, and he led them with confidence born of ancestral knowledge. As dawn approached, they reached a canyon with steep walls and a narrow entrance easily defended. Key called for a halt. "We rest here for 2 hours. The children need sleep, the horses need rest, and we need to plan our next move." Ayasha helped Nalnish down from the horse, wrapped him in the blanket she had taken from his bed, and held him while he finally allowed himself to cry. All the tears he had held back for 26 months came pouring out, his small body shaking with sobs, his hands clutching at her clothing as if she might disappear if he let go. She held him and rocked him and sang to him in Apache, the lullaby her mother had sung to her, that her grandmother had sung to her mother, the song that carried the memory of all the women who had come before, who had survived and endured and passed their strength down through generations. Thornwood sat nearby, reloading his gun, checking ammunition, preparing for the fight that would inevitably come. Key approached him, squatted down beside him. "You have made powerful enemies tonight, white man. The school director will not rest until you are captured and punished. Your life in this territory is over." "I know," Thornwood said quietly, "but I would do it again. 100 times over I would make the same choice." "Why, these are not your people. This is not your fight. It became my fight when I failed to save Taze. It became my fight when I saw what we have done to your people in the name of civilization. It became my fight when I realized that silence is complicity." He looked up at Key. "Besides, they are my people now. You made me family with the blood oath. That means something to me." Key studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You have honor. That is rare in white men. You will come with us to Mexico. We will find a place for you among the free Apache there, the ones who never surrendered. You will have a home if you want it." "I want it," Thornwood said, "more than anything." As the sun rose, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold, and Rose Ayasha finally released Nyalnish long enough for him to sleep. She tucked him in against a warm rock, covered him with the blanket, and then she took out the journal Key had given her. She wrote about Phoenix School, about the basement full of stolen souls, about Director Pratt and his righteous cruelty, about the 7 boys who had chosen freedom over safety, and about Taze's war shirt which now lay beside her, the blue beads catching the morning light. This was the power of testimony, she thought as she wrote. This was how you fought back against erasure. You documented, you witnessed, you refused to let the truth be buried or denied. And someday, maybe not today or tomorrow, but someday the world would read these words and understand what had been done, what had been stolen, what had survived despite everything. Thornwood came to sit beside her. He looked exhausted, his face lined with stress and lack of sleep, but his eyes were clear, at peace. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we run. We cross into Mexico. We find safety. And then we figure out how to live in a world where we are wanted criminals." He smiled. "Together, I suppose, since we are in this together." "Together," Ayasha agreed. And for the first time in 2 years, the word felt like hope instead of fear, like possibility instead of burden, like the beginning of something new instead of the end of something old. They rested in the canyon for 2 hours, then rode again, always south, always moving. The pursuit continued, but the Apache knew the desert in ways the cavalry never would, and they stayed ahead, staying alive, staying free. 3 days later they crossed into Mexico. The moment they stepped over the border, something changed in the air. It was subtle, indefinable, but real. They were beyond the reach of American law now, beyond the reach of boarding schools and reservations and policies designed to erase them. They were free. The village that took them in was small, poor-populated mostly by Apache who had fled the reservations years ago. But they welcomed the newcomers with open arms, found space for the children, gave them food and water and safety. They had been in the village for 2 days, just beginning to believe they might actually be safe when riders appeared on the horizon. Not cavalry, just 3 figures approaching slowly in the midday heat. Key's hand went to his rifle. The other Apache men positioned themselves between the riders and the children. Thornwood stood beside them, his gun drawn but lowered. As the riders drew closer, Ayasha's heart stopped. Margaret Coulter sat astride a gray mare flanked by 2 ranch hands, but she carried no weapons. No soldiers followed. No cavalry waited in the distance. Thornwood moved to shield Ayasha and the children, but Margaret raised her hand, palm out, in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to take them back." She dismounted slowly, her movements careful, deliberate. The ranch hands remained mounted, their hands visible and empty. Margaret walked forward alone, stopping a respectful distance away. In her hands was a leather folder. "These are citizenship papers," she said, her voice hoarse as if she had been crying. "For all 7 children. Mexican citizenship properly notarized by officials in Hermosillo, and a land grant. 40 acres near Casas Grandes. It's not much, but it's legal, safe. No one can take it from you." Ayasha stared, unable to speak. This made no sense. This was the woman who had funded Phoenix School, who had seen the boarding schools as righteous work, who had every reason to hate them. Margaret's voice cracked. "My son was 19 when he died, in a skirmish with Apache warriors near the Mogollon Rim. Your husband was trying to save his child. Mine was trying to kill people he'd never met, fighting a war he didn't understand. She held out the papers with shaking hands. I've spent 2 years asking myself which man was the savage. I've spent 2 years trying to erase people I'd never taken the time to know. And I was wrong. About all of it. She paused, looked at the 7 boys standing with the Apache men, looked at Nyalnish in his father's war shirt. I can't bring back the dead. I can't undo what was done at Phoenix or at the other schools I helped fund, but I can stop creating more ghosts. Ayasha found her voice. Why would you do this now? Because I saw you in that basement. Because I saw your son recognize you. Because I saw what we'd done to him, to all of them, and I couldn't. Margaret's composure broke. Tears streamed down her face. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I kept seeing my son's face and your son's face, and they were the same. Both children. Both someone's baby. And we killed one and tried to destroy the other, and I called it civilization. She wiped her eyes roughly. I went back to the school after you escaped. I confronted Pratt. I saw the journal you'd been writing, the one Key's people smuggled out. I read every word. She looked directly at Ayasha. I'm so sorry. I'm so desperately sorry for what we did to your husband, to your son, to your people. Thornwood stepped forward, his expression cautious. Mrs. Coulter, if this is some kind of trap. It's not. Margaret straightened, gathered herself. There's more you need to know. Samuel Harding, the Reverend. He didn't die. The bullet missed his heart by inches. He's badly wounded but alive, and he's testifying before Congress about the boarding schools. Right now. Today. She pulled another document from her folder. This is a copy of his testimony. He's naming names. Pratt, the other directors, the officials who knew what was happening and did nothing. And he's using your journal, Ayasha. Key sent it to a journalist named Jacob Reese in New York. It's being published in Harper's Weekly. Excerpts have already run. People are reading what you wrote. They're angry. They're demanding investigations. Ayasha's knees nearly buckled. Her words, her testimony, being read across the country. Margaret continued, her voice stronger now. Pratt has been removed from Phoenix. The school is under federal investigation. It won't close, not yet, but there will be reforms, oversight, and 2 senators are calling for a complete review of the boarding school system. She looked at each of them in turn. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's a start, and it's because of what you did, what you risked. She held out the papers again. This time Ayasha took them. The documents were real, official seals, signatures, legal and binding. There's one more thing, Margaret said quietly. She looked at Nyalnish, standing small but proud in his father's war shirt. Tell your son. Tell him his father was right. Hate is a poison we cannot afford to drink. I drank it for 2 years. It nearly destroyed me. But your husband's words, the ones Ethan told me about, they saved me. She looked at Thornwood. Thank you for that. For carrying his wisdom forward. Margaret mounted her horse slowly, as if every movement hurt. She looked back one final time. I can't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I can ask you to accept these papers, to take the land, to build something good there. And I can promise you that I will spend the rest of my life making sure people know the truth about what happened in those schools. I will not be silent anymore. She turned her horse, then paused. Oh, and Ethan. There's no warrant for your arrest. I made sure of it. I used every connection my husband had called in, every favor. You're free, all of you, truly free. With that she rode away, her ranch hands following. The 3 figures disappeared into the desert, leaving behind papers that transformed them from fugitives into free people, and a silence heavy with the weight of unexpected grace. Key was the first to speak. I did not think white women were capable of that kind of change. Neither did I, Ayasha whispered, staring at the papers in her hands. Thornwood read over her shoulder. It's real, all of it. Legal title to land, citizenship. We can build a school, a real school, where children learn in Apache and English both. Ayasha looked at Nyalnish, at the 6 other boys at the village of Apache who had taken them in. She thought about Margaret Coulter riding away alone, carrying the weight of her awakening, choosing to act even when it cost her everything she had believed about herself and the world. "Hate is a poison," she said quietly, repeating Taze's words. "But perhaps grace is the antidote." That night Ayasha performed a ceremony. She built a fire according to the old ways, and she dressed Nalnish in Taze's war shirt. It was too large for him, hanging almost to his knees, but he wore it with pride. And then she sang the songs that had been forbidden, the songs of her people, while her son and the other children listened and remembered and became themselves again. Thornwood watched from a distance, respectful of the sacred space, and Ayasha looked at him and thought about the strangeness of the path that had brought them here. An Apache widow and a white soldier bound together by blood and oath and shared purpose, building something new from the wreckage of the past. It was not the life she had imagined. It was not the life she had wanted. But it was a real life lived in the open with her son beside her and a future that was uncertain but possible. And for now, that was enough. The war shirt glowed in the firelight, the blue beads catching the flames, and Ayasha felt Taze's presence like a blessing. He had asked Thornwood to protect his family, and against all odds, through sacrifice and courage and stubborn hope, Thornwood had done exactly that. "Ahehi," she said to him in Apache. "Thank you." "You are welcome," he replied. And then carefully, slowly, he added words in Apache that she had not expected. "Shai. My son," speaking not of Nalnish, but claiming him, accepting the responsibility of uncle, of protector of family. Nalnish looked up, his face illuminated by firelight, and smiled. It was the first real smile Ayasha had seen on his face in 2 years. The night stretched out before them, full of stars and songs, and the sound of children laughing in Apache, speaking words that were supposed to have been forgotten but refused to die. 5 years had passed since that night at Phoenix Industrial School. The school Ayasha and Thornwood had built now taught 43 Apache children on the 40 acres Margaret Coulter had given them. Not just the 7 who had escaped, but others who had found their way across the border, drawn by whispered stories of a place where children could speak their language without fear. Nalnish, now 11, stood before a class of younger students, teaching them the creation stories in Apache. He wore his father's war shirt during ceremonies, and though he had grown into it, he wore it with solemn pride, understanding what it represented. Not just a father lost, but a legacy of resistance that could never be taken. Of the original 7 boys, 3 had reunited with families who had also fled to Mexico. 4 remained woven into the fabric of this new community. The youngest, who had been first to stand in the dormitory that night, now taught carpentry alongside Thornwood, his hands steady, his nightmares finally fading. Ayasha stood in the doorway, one hand resting on her swollen belly. This child, her second, would be born in 3 months. A daughter. She would be born into something Nalnish had never known until he was 6, the freedom to simply exist without apology. Thornwood's hand settled on her shoulder, his hair gray at the temples now. He no longer thought of himself as Ethan Thornwood, former Indian agent. He was simply Shie uncle to dozens of children who had learned that family was choice, not just blood. "Key sent word," he said quietly. "The journal has been published as a book. Testimony of the stolen. It's selling well. Samuel says 3 more senators are calling for investigations. 2 schools in Oklahoma have been shut down." Ayasha felt her throat tighten. Her words, her truth, sitting on shelves across America. People she would never meet reading about what had been done. "Margaret wrote too," Thornwood continued. "She's opened a school in San Francisco, teaching in native languages alongside English." Ayasha nodded. She had written back to Margaret months ago after struggling to find words for the complicated tangle of anger and understanding she felt. In the end, she had written simply, "You cannot bring back what was lost, but you can help ensure no more is taken. That is enough." "What are you thinking about?" Thornwood asked. "About how 5 years ago I would have gladly killed Margaret Coulter, and now I write her letters about teaching methods." Ayasha shook her head. "About how the people I thought were my enemies became my allies, and the system I thought was unbreakable is starting to crack. Taze would be proud of you. We built this together, all of us." She turned to face him. "You gave up everything. Do you ever regret it?" Thornwood looked at the children playing in the last light of day. "Not for a single moment. This is the only life I've ever lived that mattered." Nyalnish emerged from the classroom, saw his parents, and walked over. He had Taze's eyes, Ayasha's stubborn chin, and a quiet confidence that was entirely his own. "Shima Shie, the younger ones, are ready to learn the war dance. May I teach them tomorrow?" Ayasha felt emotions swell in her chest. The war dance, the sacred dance that boarding schools had forbidden. "Yes," she said. Teach them everything." As the sun set, they sat on their porch together. The war shirt hung on the wall inside, carefully preserved, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been saved. Ayasha thought about the night she had stood at the Gila River, staining her hair with red mud, mourning a husband and a life that seemed irrevocably lost. She thought about the years of hiding, of being Maria Gonzalez, of slow suffocation under the weight of shame. And she thought about this moment, sitting beside a man who had once been part of the cavalry that killed her husband and was now her partner, carrying a child who would be born free, watching her son teach the language that was supposed to have been forgotten. They had not just rescued 7 children that night at Phoenix. They had rescued possibility itself, the possibility that culture could survive deliberate attempts to destroy it, that language could persist despite punishment, that identity could be reclaimed, that memory could become weapon, that testimony could create change, that people could choose to be better than they were raised to be, that hate could be unlearned, that grace could grow in unexpected soil. This was not the end of the story. There were still thousands of children in boarding schools, still reservations full of suffering, still so much work to be done. But here on 40 acres in Mexico, they had built something that could not be destroyed. A place where Apache children learned in 2 languages, where they studied and also learned the stories of their people, the dances, the songs, the ceremonies that connected them to thousands of years of ancestors who had survived everything. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. And sometimes something is the seed from which everything grows. As darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, Ayasha made a promise. Not to Taze, though she felt his presence. Not to her mother, though she carried Desba's wisdom. Not even to Nyalnish. This promise was to the daughter growing inside her, to the children playing in the gathering dark, to all the children yet to come. We will remember. We will speak our language. We will tell our stories. We will not let them erase us, no matter how hard they try. We will survive. We will endure. We will be here speaking Apache, dancing our dances, honoring our ancestors for as long as the mountains stand and the rivers flow. Because that is what we do. We survive. And we make sure that survival means more than just breathing. It means living, fully, freely, proudly. It means being Apache without apology. The night wind carried the sound of children's laughter across the desert. Somewhere a woman was singing a lullaby in Apache. Somewhere a fire crackled and old stories were being told. And Ayasha, daughter of the Wind People, mother of Nyalnish, keeper of memory, sat on her porch in the gathering darkness and felt something she had not felt in 8 long years. Not just hope, not just survival, but joy, deep, abiding, unshakable joy. The sun had set, the stars had emerged, and they were home. Finally, completely, irrevocably home.